even without talking to any Russians or listening to anything they say, just looking at what they're doing on the battlefield, they are trying to win the war. It's not hard to see. They are taking actions at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels to win the conflict. And in every domain, they are succeeding. And all the inputs that they have gives every indication that they're going to continue to. The New York Times was correct in that clip I showed you a second ago where they said it's a war of attrition, and that's exactly what Russia's doing. They are fighting and grinding down the cumulative total of everything that the Ukraine side is doing. At the diplomatic level, at the production level, economic level, and at the manpower level. Everything you want to look, it is an attrition war, and Russia is succeedingly grinding down the Ukraine side. So there shouldn't be any confusion, but there is, and there remains to be so. And unfortunately, that extends to the highest levels of the U.S. government. Yesterday at a press briefing, Caroline Leavitt was asked, where is President Trump on this right now?
President Trump said that he needed 1.5 to 2 weeks to determine whether or not he believed Vladimir Putin wanted peace. He has been in office now for 4 months. What does he believe is going to happen in the next 1.5 to 2 weeks that would change his opinion?
Well, it is my understanding and it is our hope that Russia and Ukraine will engage in direct talks and negotiations next week in Istanbul. And we believe that meeting is going to take place. And that is a meeting the president encouraged and urged for these two sides to come together and negotiate directly. And the president has been clear from the very beginning of this conflict that he wants to see this conflict solved on the negotiating table, not on the battlefield. And he's told that to both leaders, again, both publicly and privately. So hopefully next week it will move the ball forward in this.
Is going to participate in those conversations?
We will let you know if the president plans to send a representative. I'm not tracking that at this time.
Okay, that last part was kind of important there, where, she reiterated, and that reporter asked, we showed you, I think, yesterday or day before, that Trump had said, hey, within 2 weeks, we're going to know if I'm being tapped along or if not, and then we may take a different course of action. So the question was, what's going to happen in those 2 weeks? Well, now then we see that the next level of talks is at least scheduled. And by the way, Sergei Lavrov, as you'll see in just a second here, said that they're preparing to go on June 2nd, which is Monday. As of airtime today, the Ukraine side has not agreed to do that yet. So we don't know if Zelensky's even going to send any delegations this time. I think that he's probably trying to calculate inside whether that's going to gain him or lose in him anything in his images in the West. I think that he probably has to go, because if he doesn't, I think that's going to make it easier for Trump to say, okay, we're going to walk. If you're not even trying to talk, because you heard Caroline Leavitt say he put his stamp of approval on that meeting, saying, yes, let's get together and talk. And I've encouraged both sides privately and publicly. So if Zelensky doesn't go, that's not going to play well. So I imagine that he'll probably end up going. But who's not going is us, because you heard Caroline Leavitt there ask, what about the U.S. participation? She said, we don't have any plans to go at this time. So this is direct between them. So this could indicate that the U.S. is now willing to actually do what Trump has threatened to do many times, which is to walk. And you may recall that at least for a while, I guess it was about a month ago, you had Tammy Bruce, the spokeswoman for the State Department, said, we're out of the mediating business. It's now between them. And of course, that wasn't the case, because then we did participate in the Istanbul meetings, the first ones that happened after that. But now it appears that we're not going to participate here, leaving it up to the two parties. Now, as for the Russian side, let's look at that first. Sergei Lavrov was talking about this meeting and what the intent of the meeting is supposed to be for.
Тогда же в Стамбуле было условлено о том, что Москва и Киев подготовят документы, излагающие позицию каждой из сторон для достижения устойчивого урегулирования. Российская сторона, как и договаривались, оперативно разработала соответствующий меморандум, который излагает нашу позицию по всем аспектам надежного преодоления первопричин кризиса. Наша делегация во главе с Владимиром Мединским готова представить этот меморандум делегации Украины и дать необходимые пояснения в ходе второго раунда возобновленных прямых переговоров в Стамбуле в ближайший понедельник, 2 июня.
Okay, so Russia was very clear at the ministerial level to communicate that same phrase that you see a lot, the root causes. So He says, we've got this memorandum we produced. We're going to bring it to the delegation on Monday. And that's how we're going to negotiate this. Now, it's not hard to figure out what's going to be in that memorandum. It's the administrative borders of all four of the territories, which means the withdrawal of the Ukraine armed forces from a lot of territory that they currently control. I've shown you the clip there a lot, or the quote from the news that Zelensky said, "I'm not going to withdraw from anything." So already it's dead on arrival. Even if the two sides do go, we already know that they're intractable on that. But that's the least of them, probably, because there's also demilitarization, denazification, declaration from NATO that they will never accept Ukraine into it, et cetera. And then some other things beyond that. But those are the big ones there. So we're sure that that's going to be in the Russian memorandum that's going to be delivered to the Ukraine on Monday if that event comes off. On the Ukraine side, however, there may be even more distance between the two sides, as you still see Zelensky, who said this yesterday.
Росія затягує війну і робить все, щоб просто обдурити країни, які ще намагаються впливати на Москву словом, а не тиском. Слова з Москвою не працюють. Навіть так званий меморандум, який вони обіцяли і начебто більше тижня готували, досі ніхто не бачив. Україні не передали, нашим партнерам не передали. Навіть Туреччині, як країні, яка приймала першу зустріч, теж не передали нову адженду. І хоча обіцяли абсолютно протилежне, і перш за все вони обіцяли це Сполученим Штатам Америки, президенту Трампу, черговий російський обман. Все вони роблять, щоб зустрічі були пустими. Це ще одна причина, щоб були достатні санкції, достатній тиск.
So if you weren't able to read those letters, I know they're kind of small, especially on a phone screen. Generally, what he said was these talks are going to be meaningless anyway. We need to put more pressure on the Russian side and force them into negotiations, into just and lasting peace, and all this stuff. He says a lot. It's funny. There's one thing in there he said that I think is accurate. He said the Russians don't respond to words. He may have had a different meaning, but it's pretty clear the Russians don't respond to words. And especially when your words aren't matched up by any kind of reality on the battlefield. And so these threats of sanctions, these coercive threats of all kinds of things from the West, that we're going to harm you, etc., maybe use long-range missiles, all those kind of things. Russia's just looking at the ground and going, and your point would be what? All of this leads to some confusion and something that, and I have to admit, I have a little confusion here too. My confusion centers, though, around how can we not be clear, crystal clear, what the Russians are doing, what their intent are. A lot of the confusion centers around people saying, how can they not do this 30-day ceasefire? You can't have a negotiated end if you don't first have a ceasefire. That's obvious. It's not obvious. In fact, it's not even common that much in the world. You look at, especially when things have happened before, with the First World War, how that came to a negotiated settlement. The Korean War, especially, that thing took like 1.5 years, if I'm not mistaken, of negotiations while the fighting was going on the whole time. And then you look at the Second World War. Now that was a little different because the Soviet side and the Allied United States and the West cumulatively looked for unconditional surrender. Then they said, they reached a point to where they said, all right, no more negotiations. Now we're just going to fight until you lose. And so that's exactly what happened. So there wasn't any real negotiation there. The fighting continued on until the German side lost the ability to continue to wage war. Of course, Hitler committed suicide and all that. So there are multiple ways that conflicts come to an end. And if you think that because we have decided that you have to stop talking first, or you have to stop fighting first and then have a negotiated settlement, that doesn't mean the other side is going to play along with that, especially when it's not in their view. But going back to that New York Times piece before, they have a different kind of confusion. And again, if you could toss that one up there, the New York Times itself is confused, and then some of the experts that they talk about is unclear. The New York Times writes, it is unclear what role the Kremlin expects the unfolding offensive to play in the broader complex diplomatic maneuvers over ending the war. Some Western analysts say that Mr. Putin may be using the dry weather season most conducive for offensive operations to maximize his negotiating power before giving more weight to peace talks later this year. Okay, look, folks, I don't understand how you're confused on this. They're not pushing to get a better negotiating position. They already have it. They already have the dominant position. Why did they need to fight a little bit more so that they can get a better dominant position? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And it's just like we don't listen to anything the Russian side has been saying. I mean, how many sound bites have I put in over the last just 4 months from Vladimir Putin, from Lavrov himself, or showed things from Peskov? They've all been saying the same things here. We had on our show Ambassador Polyansky, the deputy UN ambassador for the Russians in New York, and he was pretty clear on that we will either win with negotiations or we will keep fighting. So he still used kind of diplomatic language. Now, here's something that happened yesterday at the United Nations Security Council. There were speeches made by the U.S. ambassador, who was at that time, I guess the acting is, I think his name is Kelly, Ambassador Kelly, and then he's going to be followed by the Russian ambassador Nabenzia. Now, first of all, note what the American guy is going to say here, because he's going to kind of repeat something that the White House has been saying, but kind of in genteel language.
The United States has worked tirelessly with both sides, seeking a path to peace. We want an end to this war. As the first step on that path to peace, the United States put forward a proposal for an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire. Ukraine unequivocally accepted, pending Russia's agreement to do the same. Since then, we have been urging Russia to accept a ceasefire. Following President Trump's May 21 call with Russian President Putin, the Russian Federation is expected to provide a term sheet broadly outlining its vision for a ceasefire. We will judge Russia's seriousness towards ending the war not only by the contents of that term sheet, but more importantly, by Russia's actions. If Russia makes the wrong decision to continue this catastrophic war, the United States will have to consider stepping back from our negotiation efforts to end this conflict. To be clear, in doing so, we would not be abandoning our principles or our friends. Rather, we would be recognizing Russia's refusal to work with us toward a desirable outcome.
Desirable from whose perspective? I get it. We want the desirable outcome for us is to negotiate a settlement where Russia just stops where they are and doesn't go any further and doesn't demand anything more, leaves Ukraine intact, leaves the Zelensky regime intact, allows them to have negotiations, allows them to have bilateral relations, etc., and just keep all that open. I get it. That's what you would want. But listen, when you say that kind of thing on the floor of the United Nations Security Council, that if we don't get the desired end we want, then we will walk away, and then just say, this is not us abandoning our friends or anybody else. It's just us walking away and leaving them to their own fate. I mean, it kind of is. I mean, if we're just being honest. Now, that's what I recommend. I've been saying it for months. That's exactly what we should do, to say, you guys figure this out, because no one's listening to us anyway. No, I'm talking about the Western side, not even talking about Russia at this point. Nobody, neither anybody in Kiev nor in Brussels or other capitals in Europe seem to be listening to anything that we say. They seem, I mean, you saw Zelensky there in that clip I just played from yesterday. He hasn't changed anything. He still doesn't want to have a negotiated settlement. He doesn't want to give up anything. He doesn't want to listen to anything the Russians say. He just wants to keep fighting, and then he just wants the West to keep doing more sanctions, more air defense missiles, more artillery pieces, everything. I mean, he just wants more of all that stuff. It just doesn't want anything around diplomacy. So I told you about Ambassador Polyansky that we interviewed last month and what he said. Last night, and I mentioned this at the outset of the show, last night at the United Nations Security Council, the Russian ambassador followed up the American statement there with something that could not be any more crystal clear and explicit. And why this is not on this morning's New York Times, since the speech was made in New York, I don't know, but I haven't even seen, maybe it's just been mentioned somewhere, but this should be a bombshell because he lays out in the most explicit terms available exactly what Russia's plan is.
No new anti-Russian sanctions, nor deliveries of weapons to Ukraine or any other hostile steps vis-à-vis Russia will be able to prevent the inevitable military defeat of the Zelensky regime. The ball is in Ukraine's court. Either talks followed by peace, or the unavoidable defeat of Ukraine on the battlefield with different conditions for the conflict's end.
And there you have it. Explicitly, you either come to the negotiating table and get an ugly deal and we end the fighting today, or we go into the inevitable military defeat. That is point blank claimed by the Russian side. And why in the world that's not on every headline in the Western world, I can't understand.